So what this is saying is when you have promises or when you have functions that are asynchronous that depend on the result or the result of another asynchronous function, instead of using this dot then thing, you then can just use async await and await this one, take that value and pass it into the next one, and it all can happen within the same scope. Which one is more readable, that or that? In my opinion, it's this one, because it's all happening in the same scope. It looks like it's synchronous. It actually technically is synchronous because you are awaiting for it to happen. The whole function is asynchronous, so if you run that and you don't do await, it'll happen asynchronously. But because it is awaiting, so once you're inside of this scope, okay, this is I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Asynchronous functions, if I have a bunch of synchronous code right here, it'll all execute in order. But if I have one asynchronous piece of code right here, and it is, say, this function that calls a bunch of other things that I await for, this is going to execute the initial part of this return first promise, okay? And then when it gets to the point where it has to wait, that part will be thrown into another part of the event loop, which will basically, it'll execute the rest of this code. And then once this is done, it'll go to the next part of this code. Okay? But inside of this block, it is synchronous, essentially. It is running synchronously within its own scope. Okay? You can kind of think about it that way. But globally, the whole thing is like asynchronous, and it's like pulling a promise out, running somewhere else, running other code, and then once it's done, it returns that. So, whoops. This is kind of the beauty of asynchronous code, is you can create, you can make a lot of your code incredibly optimized by using promises properly and making it so you can execute a bunch of these blocks instead of one after another. You can just hand it off to here, and using promise.all, or if you structure however you structure it differently, it'll just return whenever it's returned and then continue going, and basically they're running in parallel almost. So asynchronous code can be really handy. This can be really good, or it can be really bad. It's not this is the correct way to do it. It's just, this is a way to do it. Okay, so it's more readable, but it does technically the same thing as this one. Okay, because this is running asynchronously. This whole thing is running asynchronously. However, in itself, it's kind of still synchronous. All right. So let's take a look at this provided code. We require shop for beans to blah, 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 blah. If you like to the library, okay. I don't really care. I just promised that all of those are asynchronous. Great. The following checkpoints, you'll create an async function. Const make beans equals async. Okay. So in your function, declare a variable const type equals await shop beans. Const is soft equals await soak type. And then, whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Next, inside of here, const dinner equals await cook. Generally, it's not good to have articles instead of function names, because you can literally just call it cook beans and it means the same thing. Articles are generally just not useful. All right, and then done that. Okay, log your dinner. Okay, console.log dinner. Check work. So I'm just taking the result of this and putting it in there. And notice how that took a long time. So this can be a really good thing. However, you kind of have to be careful, because if you're doing something like this and you're like inside of a loop, it can make your code really unoptimized. So it is generally a good thing to try to avoid doing this kind of thing where you have to wait for the result of something in order to pass it into something else that you have to wait for. If you can structure your code so that all of this can happen inside of one function, or you don't have to wait for something, you should do it if there's a way to do it. But that gets into like paradigms and how do you structure all of your code. That gets kind of complicated, but yeah, that's a thing. So anyway, I'll see you in the next video on handling errors, which I think I should, yeah, I'm gonna do my favorite version of handling errors. All right, see you then.